The Liberals' fall economic statement released this week contains fewer spending promises than usual, but it goes big on housing, announcing new measures aimed at fixing Canada's housing crisis. First, it commits $15 billion in new loans for the construction of rental apartments, but that money doesn't start flowing until 2025. There is also an additional $1 billion to help build more affordable housing. That money also slated for 2025. The federal government is also introducing a new Canadian mortgage charter to help Canadians in mortgage trouble know their options, and they are cracking down on short-term rentals like Airbnb. For more on this, the Minister of Housing, Sean Fraser, joins me now. Minister, welcome back to the show.
It's a pleasure to be with you. Thanks for having me.
The Mayor of Toronto, Olivia Chow, who I know you met with recently, she said the funds for housing needs to come a lot faster, and thus the plan unveiled by the Deputy Prime Minister just not ambitious enough. How does what was announced this week meet the housing demands?
So I disagree with the Mayor's characterization, but I should say we've had a wonderful opportunity to work together, and I believe we're going to make serious progress, in particular on the Housing Accelerator Fund application the City of Toronto submitted to help increase the ambition from a systemic reforms point of view within the city, supported by federal funding. But specific to yesterday, I struggle with the characterization that it would not be ambitious to inject an additional $15 billion into a program that's actually offering low-cost loans to get more homes built. Just last week, in fact, this program put more than $1 billion on the table for the City of Toronto and more than $4 billion nationally that's going to create almost 12,000 new units across the country. In addition, we've demonstrated our commitment in the long term to continuing to invest in affordable housing with an additional $1 billion to support housing for low-income families, in addition to those apartments that'll be for more middle-class families in the market. So there's opportunities for us to continue to demonstrate that ambition, and this week's fall economic statement is going to help secure support for the long term.
But those measures don't come on stream until 2025, right? So I think that's the criticism, not that it's $15 billion in loans, is that the loans won't be available until some point 2 years from now.
Well, look, I understand the argument, but that fails to acknowledge the fact that these programs already exist and have money in them now. The proof point that I've just mentioned is literally last week we announced more than $1 billion from this program for the City of Toronto. What yesterday's the fall economic statement demonstrates is the fact that this money is going to be here. Developers who are looking to get building permits now, who are doing planning for their next project, know that there will be a pipeline of support. And this builds on previous measures, including the GST elimination, including some of the zoning reforms we're pursuing at municipal levels. And we're locking in for the long-term certainty that there's going to be support there to keep Canada building.
There's another criticism out there from Mike Moffat, who's the Senior Director at the Smart Prosperity Institute. Not an unfriendly voice for your government, but, a pretty staunch housing advocate. I think he gave you about a C grade, C plus, C minus, something like that. Because while there are efforts to deal with the supply issue, he feels there's not enough to deal with the demand issue, particularly with the high number of international students coming into the country and really creating a student housing crunch. You've got developers buying up single-family units to turn them into rental properties for students, which regular families can't compete with. What do you need to do on that? Because there's a lot of international students putting a lot of pressure on the market.
Look, there are, and I should say, first and foremost, I have enormous respect for Mike. I think he's an intelligent and thoughtful voice when it comes to housing policy across Canada. The measures outlined in the fall economic statement are not the only measures that we're moving forward with on housing. There are challenges with our temporary programs when it comes to immigration because they're driven by demand. It's not a set level, as is the case with our permanent residency programs, and businesses, institutions, and provincial governments have a lot to say about these programs. I do think there's an opportunity for us moving forward with a trusted partner model to reward institutions that actually provide housing for students, have a history of supporting them by giving them preferred access to study permits. And if it means that certain colleges that don't have a history of success, that don't provide supports or housing for their students,
build residences, for example.
Precisely. If they don't get study permits to allow their students to come in a timely way, or in some cases at all, depending on the nature of the institution, that's something that we have to be okay with. There has to be a role for institutions to actually provide housing for students. We are looking at additional reforms that could open access to existing programs for student housing as well. I've had a number of these conversations with institutions across the country, and I think we can help scale the housing for them at the same time we implement more stringent reforms
like
on the program.
Like the GST break, for example, is something that could apply to student housing.
It does already, but there's other low-cost financing opportunities as well.
But the situation with international students, a lot of universities, a lot of colleges to deal with funding shortfalls have gone aggressively on the international market because they can charge higher tuition, and so it's become a huge source of revenue for them. And whether they're here permanently or not, they're competing for the same housing stock. So does Canada need to look at a cap on those numbers to get these things under control, as Moffat would suggest?
One of the things Canadians need to understand is the international student program is an incredible contributor to Canada's well-being. We're dealing with an injection into the economy of $25 billion in GDP every year, but more importantly, this is a pipeline of future talented Canadian citizens who are going to be educated here, work here, contribute to communities. What we need to do is make sure the institutions that are bringing them here, who are making a lot of money based on those higher tuition fees, are actually making the investments to support them as well. So I don't know that we need to insist that a cap is the right approach, but I think if we actually work to partner with institutions who provide support for people, offer an opportunity for communities and institutions to plan for the long term on the number that they're going to welcome, we can benefit from an ambitious immigration and international student program, so long as institutions are supporting the students who arrive.
So a bit like you're using federal pressure and federal money to get zoning regulations rewritten at the municipal level, maybe doing similar things with the access to international students to incentivize post-secondary institutions to boost their housing stock and work on that. Is this sort of an approach? Is that what you're thinking?
Well, my sense is with the study permit in and of itself, given the boon that institutions benefit from when they welcome international students, it is a strong incentive.
Of course.
But if we insist that they meet certain standards when it comes to providing for the students who arrive, I think we can create a disincentive to bringing more students than college or university can actually handle. In addition, if we open up certain financing opportunities to construct more student housing, it's a great thing not just for the students who come, but when students live in student residences, they're not competing in the market in the communities where their institutions are located, and that cascading effect creates space in the market that will help bring costs down for everyone.
We had Dawn Iveson, the former mayor of Edmonton, and Jennifer Keesmaat on the show the other day. She's the former chief planner with the City of Toronto. They're working on housing, as you know. Their hope is that this builds a momentum and it creates an urgency. You suggested there will be more measures coming, presumably in the budget in the spring, but the fiscal track we saw this week from Chrystia Freeland doesn't show a lot of wiggle room. I mean, how ambitious can you be in the budget in the spring? What should Canadians expect?
Well, there's a number of different aspects to my response. First is that not all of the measures that we need to put forward demand enormous sums of money. We will have to continue to make investments, particularly for non-market housing, if we want to build at a pace we need to build. But look at the rental construction financing initiative, now the apartment construction loan program. This is low-cost financing that accelerates the pace of building. That money gets paid back. Look at the Canada Mortgage Bond Program.
It's tied to an asset, because presumably the houses they build are collateral. Correct?
That's right. And in fact, there's commitments from the builders who benefit from the program to offer the units in those buildings at and below what the market will bear. So the program brings costs down, gets repaid to government, and allows us to continue to support more housing. Similarly, when we move forward with $20 billion in capitalization under the Canada Mortgage Bond Program, we are selling insurance that takes the risk out of the equation for financial institutions who then offer lower rates in the market to builders. That's actually a program that makes a modest amount of money for the federal government each year because we're selling a product. There's different things we can do. They don't all have to cost billions of dollars, but we do need to lock in long-term investments so we can make sure in the future we're not dealing with the same situation we're dealing with now.
Okay. Another key thing you've done that doesn't cost money, could generate money, is the denial of tax deductions for people who own Airbnbs or VRBOs and you do get into the short-term rental market, where you say you're not going to let them write off their expenses if they're not in compliance with municipal and provincial regulations. There's a lot of pushback on this, and that it won't open up, say, the 30,000 units that are used for short-term rentals, and a lot of skepticism, and even a report from the Conference Board of Canada that Airbnb is citing, saying that they're not the problem. They aren't affecting housing supply in a big way in Canada. What do you expect from that, and what do you say to the skeptics to say this just won't work?
Well, we can point to examples where communities around the world and more recently within Canada have actually adopted measures that are showing early signs of progress. The marquee example globally would probably be New York City, that had 22,000 something units on the Airbnb market, and when they made changes to crack down to free up housing supply, within a very short period of time, 19,000 of those units made their way into the market for people to live in. One of the things that is flexible, that's built into the policy design, is we're not doing this across the board. We're working with provincial governments and municipalities who establish sets of rules.
Yeah, you'll get their back, basically.
That's right. And where a player in the system chooses not to abide by those rules, they're going to be denied certain tax advantages to make sure that we're not creating a playing field that advantages short-term rentals for a few days here and there, rather than providing a home to the family. It's hard to predict with certainty how many of those 30-something thousand units could be freed up, but my sense is it's going to have a positive impact.
There's been some criticism, though, that some people use these short-term rentals to get a little bit of extra income to help pay off their mortgage, to deal with the high cost of living, or they have a cottage that they do this with seasonally every once in a while to help offset their expenses. And it's not really, it's going to punish people who are using it to supplement their income without opening up their primary residence, because they might just use their house for a week or two here and there.
Well, when we actually tie the measures to decisions taken by local governments, whether it's municipal or provincial governments, we have the opportunity to defer the decision-making as to what the local market needs to the government who's closest to the situation on the ground. I will trust the communities in my own backyard to make decisions about what's appropriate in terms of the use of Airbnb or other short-term rentals to provide a tourism opportunity and a bit of an income supplement to some, but on the flip side of that coin, deny an opportunity for a family to live in permanently. My view is I would prefer to use homes to provide homes for families in the long term rather than to provide a short-term opportunity for somebody to make a little bit of cash on the side.
Housing Minister Sean Fraser, thanks so much for your time today.
Pleasure as always. Thanks very much.